Our trees have to cope with increasing droughts, extreme weather events, invasive species, wood-boring insects and disease. But now they face a new threat: woody biomass. This slideshow summarises 4 years of research into logging for biomass in Switzerland. All photos are my own unless otherwise specified, and I have used what 3 words to pinpoint their exact location. However, most were taken in the canton of Bern, which produces the bear's share at around 1/5 of all Swiss wood. Forests cover nearly a third of Switzerland and have traditionally been managed using near-natural silviculture. But the federal authorities are keen to develop domestic renewables and believe our forests aren't being exploited properly and should supply much more energy wood. Logging for energy wood is therefore set to increase by anywhere from 40% up to a whopping 89% of today's use, according to a report co-authored by the Swiss Federal Office for Energy. Around 40% of all the wood harvested each year in Switzerland, some 2 to 2.4 million cubic meters, is burned in the form of energy logs and wood chips. But add waste wood, sawmill residues and wood pellets, and the total energy wood we burn yearly is double that. The biggest change in the last 20 years has been the switch from logs to wood chips and pellets. Wood chip production has risen by a massive 226% from 2004 to 2021. Domestic pellet production is growing at a steady 5% a year and reached a record 324,000 tonnes in 2021. Around 75% of the pellets burnt in Switzerland are made from Swiss wood. Swiss biomass is largely of the woody variety derived from trees as opposed to non-woody biomass like manure or food waste, and it is used to produce mostly heat. It is the second most important renewable after hydropower, but is set to play an even bigger role in our energy mix. This is bad news for our forests. It was bad news for the centenary beech arching over one of my favourite forest paths. They were chipped and chopped whole into logs and wood chips. Logging has been increasing in both scope and intensity, especially across the Swiss plateau where all these photos were taken. Telltale piles of biomass are multiplying, even in nature reserves. Despite this, we are expected to believe, just like Alice in Wonderland, in as many as 6 impossible things, namely, that logging for biomass is sustainable, that laws protect forests, that only waste wood and residues are used, and that biomass is economical, clean, and carbon neutral. So let's take the red pill, stay in Wonderland, and see how far down each rabbit hole goes. Logging for biomass is sustainable, we are told, and it's quite okay to log even more because Swiss forests are growing. But is it, and are they? Swiss forests fall into 5 distinct geographical regions, and they aren't all created equal. Forests are indeed growing in the Alps and Southern Alps because tree lines are rising due to climate change and pastures are being abandoned, but also because the rugged terrain and low yields make them difficult, expensive, and unattractive to log. The picture is very different on the easy-to-log, high-yield Swiss plateau. More than 40% of our energy wood already comes from this least forested region. Annual yield here is outstripping growth, according to data from the Swiss National Forest Inventories. This is not sustainable. The decrease in forest density across the plateau, shown in red and orange on the map, is all the more alarming because it has occurred in just over a decade's time. Plateau forests have also shrunk in size by 3% from 2001 to 2021, while the canton of Bern's plateau forests have decreased by 8.5% over the same period. The latest Swiss Statistical Yearbook of Forestry 2021 concedes that increased exploitation is responsible for the 11% decrease in plateau standing stock in the last 20 years. Of course, this isn't all due to biomass extraction. But take the example of the Gürbetal in the canton of Bern, where the town of Belp is actively promoting biomass-fueled distance heating systems, sourcing the wood from the surrounding forests. In 2012, they built a wood chip depot marked with a green star. The white stars represent 4 of the largest biomass burners. Notice how tree cover loss, marked in pink, spreads from 2001 to 2021, but particularly after 2012. Thick beech forests like this one are therefore becoming rarer and thinner. Indeed, since this photo was taken a year ago, the ancient Norway spruce on the left has been felled, as have the 4 trees to the right. This is not near natural forestry, neither is it sustainable. But there is nothing to fear, we are told, because robust laws and guidelines protect our forests. Why then are plateau forests shrinking? And how did this silvicultural intervention in an official protection forest against landslides exceed the mandated 1,200 square metres? Switzerland's first forestry law of 1876 was drawn up following catastrophic flooding caused in large part by the clear-cutting of Bernese Oberland forests to fuel the Industrial Revolution. The law was so successful in enforcing near-natural forestry, as well as banning clear-cutting and deforestation without afforestation, that Swiss forests grew back from 10% to the 32% coverage we see today. Although current legislation has kept the bans on clear-cutting and deforestation, logging is once more on the rise, this time somewhat ironically, in the name of climate change mitigation. But even before this, the Programme Forestier Suisse of 2004 to 2015, shown here, gave the green light to more radical logging, even allowing interventions of up to 2 hectares in size. And take a look at this compilation. What do all these photos have in common? It may be hard to believe, but all are legally defined as forests, according to our 2 main forestry laws, the Federal Act on Forests and the Ordinance on Forest. According to both laws, forestry depots such as this one in Bernay in the canton of Geneva, built where trees once grew in a nature reserve of national importance, still count as forests. Such forests don't help our biodiversity or wildlife. Swiss biotopes, many of them woodland ecosystems, are already some of the most threatened across OECD countries, with over a third of all plant and animal species under threat. Yet forests that claim to be protected by strict legislation, like this emerald network near Bern, are being industrially logged for energy wood. This forestry road, slicing through a supposed wildlife refuge zone, also counts as forest. It is unlikely to help wildlife either, quite the contrary. Forestry roads lead to fragmentation, disturbance, increased predation and potential groundwater contamination. Switzerland has one of the highest densities of forest roads in Europe, rising to 2% in plateau forests. Deforestation is banned in Switzerland, but nevertheless occurs as roads, buildings, towns, villages and agriculture continue their inexorable nibbling. 176 hectares of forest disappeared in 2019. In 2020, another 124 hectares were lost. Clear-cutting is also prohibited. In fact, Switzerland is one of only 2 European countries to ban the practice. But while this may look like a clear-cut, it isn't, thanks to the Ordinance on Forests, which states that clear-cutting does not arise if the old stand is cleared following sufficient and secured regeneration. Lewis Carroll himself couldn't have put it better. Still, it is also rather convenient that Switzerland has one of the highest rates of natural regeneration in Europe. The truth is that laws and legislation aren't enough to protect our forests. But biomass is in any case anodyne, we are told, because it only makes use of waste wood from logging and residues from sawmills. But all the wood you see here, including the massive trunks in the foreground, was burnt as logs or wood chips. This sign, spotted in the Gantrisch Regional Nature Park, admits that around half our energy wood comes from forests, but claim that only inferior forest wood is used. Can this 39-metre-tall beech, whose circumference was too wide to embrace, really be considered waste wood? Apparently so, because it was felled in December 2021. Here it is being chipped 2 months later before being delivered directly to a local district heating system where it was burnt quite literally green because it did not have the time to dry out. The same fate befell this venerable Norway spruce. It was once a valuable habitat tree growing in a nature reserve of international as well as national importance, which claims to practice modest forest management to improve biodiversity. Hardwood trunks, mostly from oak, are targeted in the Réserve naturelle des Noms de Borba et des Picolat in the canton of Geneva, which forms part of another Emerald Network site, as well as a Ramsar site of national and international importance. Here is this waste wood being shredded into wood chips back at the Berner depot. The biomass industry is actually lobbying for more trunks to be used because the branches, needles and leaves they should be using burn less cleanly and less hotly and produce more ash. Claims of waste wood as smokescreens, as is the optimised cascade, which should see timber reused and recycled before being burnt. A total of 5.66 million cubic metres of energy wood was burnt in 2021, but only 14.5 of this came from old recycled wood. The rest, some 4.84 million cubic metres, was extracted from our hedges, parks and gardens, as well as from motorway and waterway maintenance, but it mostly came from forests like this one, and much of it from whole trees like these ancient hardwood beech trunks. You can't obtain 4.84 million cubic metres of burnable wood from waste wood and offcuts alone. Exploiting forest biomass makes economic sense, we are told, but wood-burning systems are expensive to install and operate, which is why mobile pellet burners like this one are heavily subsidised. They cost the taxpayer 9.1 million Swiss francs in 2019. More burners lead to greater demand for wood and to higher prices. Energy wood prices increased by 8% from 2016 to 2020, but then surged a further 10% last summer as the energy crisis took hold, according to Radio-Télévision Suisse. The price of pellets has rocketed by 64% since December 2021, boosted largely by a surge in demand. Biomass delivery costs have also risen, as have other financial costs which the biomass industry likes to keep hidden, such as the need for additional dust separators, maintenance fees including the recalibration or replacement of heat meters, and the mandatory emissions control for small systems. The fee for ash disposal has almost tripled for some plants in recent years because Swiss landfills are increasingly reluctant to accept the ash, which can cause instability and groundwater contamination. Ash isn't the only byproduct of burning woody biomass. Smoke, particulate matter, heavy metals and dioxins are also produced. Trees don't just sequester carbon, they also lock up toxins that are released on burning, making wood smoke as hazardous to human health as tobacco smoke. Although Swiss laws governing fine particle emissions are more stringent than those of the European Union, they are still twice the World Health Organization's recommended 5 microgram per meter cube limit. Residential burning is particularly problematic because emissions occur closer to the ground and filters are not yet mandatory for 13 to 20 kilowatt installations found in private homes. So-called eco-stoves have been shown to emit 650 times more fine particles than a modern HGV truck, including within the home. Even filtered flues like this one above the school in Belp are rarely 100% effective, and more emissions and pollution are produced during biomass deliveries. Here is one of the 16 trailer loads of local wood chips which are delivered every week to Belp's biomass burners over the winter months. Tractors are preferred to less polluting, quieter trucks because agricultural vehicles benefit from fuel subsidies, whereas trucks do not. Open-air burning, like here in a regional nature park in the canton of Vaud, is even more problematic. According to the canton, burning 50 kilos of moist wood waste emits as much particulate matter 10 as an HGV truck travelling 5,000 kilometres, or a waste incineration plant burning 30,000 kilos of domestic waste. Logging offcuts were nevertheless incinerated in 8 large bonfires, releasing a 6-kilometre plume of smoke that stretched all the way into France. Wood ash cannot be disposed of in forests or on fields in Switzerland because it contains toxic chemicals such as arsenic and mercury and often exceeds the safe limits for chromium, cadmium and lead. It was, however, left in this regional nature park, even though the wood should never have been burnt in the first place. The other 75,000 tonnes of wood ash produced annually by the country's 600,000 wood-burning systems are thrown out with the municipal solid waste and end up in landfills. Clean biomass is an oxymoron. Burning wood also produces CO2, which is curious because we are told that burning wood is carbon neutral. This is the final and deepest rabbit hole of them all. Fossil fuels are needed at every step, from felling to processing and transportation, yet the CO2 released from tailpipes and flues is not counted. Swiss forest soils usually sequester more carbon than the trees growing on them. Radical interventions such as this release carbon dioxide both during logging and long afterwards by decomposing branches and roots, as well as by soil organisms stimulated by the sudden light and heat. Yet this escaping CO2 is not counted. More CO2 is released by improperly dried wood chips, as indeed is methane, which is an even more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, but neither of these gases is counted. And CO2 is of course released when the wood is finally burnt, regardless of whether the flues are filtered. This CO2 doesn't count either. The carbon neutral artifice is rooted in the fact that forests are renewable. Regrowing trees will recapture the CO2 released when the wood was burnt, the argument goes, but it takes minutes to burn wood and decades or centuries for trees to grow back. 1 cubic metre of wood stores 1 tonne of CO2, according to the Federal Office for the Environment's rule of thumb. It will therefore take decades for these beech saplings to store as much carbon as this old Douglas spruce, spared from the latest logging, which is why burning a lot of trees in a short period of time in the middle of the climate and biodiversity crises is problematic. Most trees regrow too slowly to offset emissions, and forest carbon stocks should anyway be preserved and preferably increased. Natural and naturalised forests represent the single most effective and cheapest means we have of removing CO2 from the atmosphere, to say nothing of all the other services they perform. Wood production is already by far the most important forest function in Switzerland. If we cut even more trees, how can this not impact the other functions? Which is why the European Academy's Science Advisory Council, which represents 27 national science academies of the EU member states, plus Norway and Switzerland, says it's simplistic to call forest biomass carbon neutral and renewable. Over 500 scientists from around the world have gone further, warning that the switch from burning fossil fuels to burning wood is a false solution, that per unit of heat or electricity produced adds up to 3 times more CO2 to the atmosphere than burning fossil fuels. The Federal Office for the Environment, meanwhile, warns that strategies that only increase the use of wood as biofuel are not efficient from a CO2 balance perspective. Yet biomass proponents want to increase logging for energy wood, resorting to greenwashing and smokescreens to try and convince us that burning trees is good for the climate, forests and the carbon cycle. Their diagrams and arguments centre on trees, but cut down these trees too fast, as we are currently doing on the plateau, and the arguments collapse. And can we really pretend that burning our own forests for energy wood is good, when we condemn the burning of the Amazon, Arctic and Australian forests as carbon and environmental catastrophes and even crimes? Wood burning is the opposite of a green transition, which is all about changing to emission-free heat sources. Our trees and forests perform too many valuable but often unappreciated services for them to be going up in smoke. We can't let the biomass industry have the last laugh. Because if the biomass behemoth is let loose, whose forests will be burning next?